This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 390 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. We are talking today about how to be a good volunteer abroad. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation where I'm recording this podcast today. So I think the idea of combining some volunteer work with travel is very attractive for a lot of us. I think especially people who travel thoughtfully in the first place are very likely to want to give back in some way. But it's always a tricky question, or something to think about at least. Are we volunteering to make ourselves feel good without being sure that what we're doing is actually genuinely doing good? You know, that's the big question. I do a lot of volunteering here in my hometown. For example, for many years, I've been a volunteer at my son's soccer club. I sit on the managing committee. I update their website. I manage his team. I don't actually have, really the spare time to do this, but I make time because I want to give back to the community and, support a club that supported my son. I feel like it's worth doing. Now, I know that's not a travel example, but in this case, I know that I'm volunteering that the outcome is only good. I'm not taking anybody's livelihood away. The club would not be paying anyone to update the website if I didn't do it. The job would just fall to another committee member who would, probably would have even more work to do. So, there's nothing detrimental there. But I also get to contribute to the sustainable and ethical growth of the club. I can see many positive additions over the years we've been involved. So that's kind of how I want to think about travel kind of volunteering as well. There's a few issues. For example, when we travel, the longevity factor can be a problem. Like usually, we're just dropping in and out of a location for a relatively brief time. And we don't always have a good idea of what's needed, and we don't even get to follow the future development well. And that's just the start of what might be problematic. So all this and more on this episode. Now, my first guests today are Kim Crown and Edward Liamo. You might remember them from our Meet Cutes episode in episode 382. So Edward and Kim actually met when Kim went to Tanzania on a volunteer program. So for this episode, they explain some of the challenges that they've learned about that exist with making volunteer programs abroad work well.
My experience working with the volunteers around that time, challenge that I would see is there was no continuity. A new volunteer would come in, and this was at a program that had volunteers
year-round.
Mm-hmm.
At the same sites.
What kind of work were they doing?
Teaching at schools, teaching English at schools.
Working at a health clinic.
Yeah, working on social projects. If they had any entrepreneurship
women's
knowledge,
groups,
they would hopefully teach it to this project. So it was a diverse range of projects. But usually what I would see is the way the project was set up, it allowed continuity where they could come and say, okay, Kim was here 2 months ago. What did she do? What did she achieve? And how can I continue on to that? That was never...
That's how it should have been, but that's not what it was.
But people didn't want it. There was a sort of pride of no, I want to do my thing. There was that, and there was also the organization not fostering it. So it was two-sided. It was two-sided. But there was a lot of pride of new volunteers coming and saying, no, I just want to do my thing, but then they're not there long enough. It was only a 3-month maximum.
3 weeks to 3 months. So yes. Some people were only there 3 weeks.
3 weeks. So
yeah.
So you'd find the organization or the project wasn't moving forward. It just kept going in the cycle of somebody's here now, they're going to do their thing, they're going to leave. Somebody's here now, they're going to do this. So it just ended up being...
not a lot of long-term positive impact, I would say.
Yes.
I think, I definitely agree with that. I think, what I would caution people who are considering volunteering against is coming in with your own plan and ideas. This is the problem with development over decades and decades, the big, big government level, USAID level development is that these huge countries, these governments go in and they're you need a aqueduct or you need new water or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they're doing what they think is right and not listening to what local communities are. And that is happening I think things have changed a bit, but that trickles down all the way to the smallest volunteer experiences, as Edward said. And you'd have all these volunteers coming in and just well, this is what I want to build a chicken coop at this orphanage. So I'm going to spend my 4 weeks doing that. And then they do that and then they leave and then it's not maintained. The next person comes in, they're like, well, I'm going to teach blah, blah, blah to these kids. And it's just, so I think, coming in and listening and like hearing what is actually needed and wanted and helping to foster that is like the absolute starting point for any person going to volunteer anywhere in the world, even in your own backyard, like volunteering in your own town.
Yes.
So that's like what I would encourage volunteers to start with. That in and of itself would make a big difference. My challenge with volunteering in general, as we've said, like some people were there for 3 weeks and you can kind of like stick your nose up to that. I was in Tanzania for on and off for over a decade and also in other countries actually in East Africa too. There is value in that as well. Like there is value in people coming for even a short time and having that experience. And some of those people did come back and do something amazing later, or they had some sort of learning and experience that maybe changed the way they viewed the world down the road. And I don't want to discount that that's also a positive aspect of volunteering. I think it just has to be done without a negative impact where you're going and on the people who are meant to be the receiving of your, whatever it is, your knowledge, your whatever you're doing.
Your time.
So I still struggle with that. I think, we have people who want to come on our tours who are like, I really want to volunteer for like a day before my safari. And I'm like, oh, you really can't do anything in a day.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't want to take away their opportunity of at least like seeing real life and experiencing something like that's the day-to-day versus like a tourist experience. And so we try to incorporate some of that in a responsible way, even in our tours, so that people can see like, what is life even like here versus, rather than just being in a car on safari in a national park. So it's tricky. Like, I don't think there's any like one answer that's right or wrong. I think it's just having people like be really intentional about why they're doing what they're doing and what they're hoping to get out of it and what they're hoping to give is at least a good starting point.
Yeah.
It is so tricky. In a perfect world, people with carefully defined skill sets would go where local people have defined, we need someone to help us do this. And they would stay for, 6 to 12 months longer if possible, and real things would happen. But of course, that's not realistic for a lot of people to be able to do that. And so you're right. I guess there is some value in those very short-term programs in that it's a bit like, engaging with wildlife in less perfect settings. Like, should we only ever see an elephant in the far distance?
Yes.
Or if we can see them in a sanctuary or something, and then we might begin to care more and therefore take bigger actions that help in the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I think it's like all these concepts can be translated to like the different experiences and industries for sure. The other thing I would say that we saw a lot in Tanzania, I don't know much about what's going on now, is these quote unquote volunteer programs where like all these young people would come and they'd volunteer for like 2 hours a day. And then they were really just there to like go out and be social and like meet guys or girls or like drink and party. And there was so much of that in our town of Moshi.
This was the volunteerism era.
Yeah.
Like that time. It was that volunteerism era. It was a trend. Everybody was doing it. This organization existed that Kim came through.
But our organization was at least a little more intentional and positive, I would say, as compared to some of these other places that started popping up all over the place.
Yes. But then I think, there's also volunteers that came through that organization that were of the mindset of, 2 hours is good.
Yeah, I'm doing something good, but I'm also a tourist. But they were much more focused on the tourist part of it than the doing good. And that there was no vetting process with the volunteers who came in. It was just, you want to come, you have the money to pay for it. Right. Welcome. Okay. So, I guess that's another point to include is on the receiving end, having like maybe more of a vetting process and not just letting anyone who wants to come. I mean, that's tricky too. I don't say that lightly as if it's an easy choice to make or even what is the vetting process. But, for these organizations that are trying to be more intentional and offer at least like some longer term experiences, there should be a vetting. Like, what skills are you bringing to the table? What are your intentions in coming? What are you hoping to do and learn and see? Just something. So there's at least like some better foundation for those people who show up than just anyone who wants to come and can afford it.
Yeah, and then also just also maybe as from a volunteer standpoint is, like do what you would do in your own backyard. You would see volunteers who would come and they'd want to go visit a school. And I'm like, well, if you go visit a school on a random day, you're interrupting scheduling. You wouldn't do that where you're from, just show up at a school on a random day. So just like act like you would in your backyard, like in your home, back in your home country. Like, oh, like, yes. And then now you're at a school, you take pictures, those kids don't have consent. The kids are happy. They're happy to see a camera and all the digital photography. And then you leave and then you post. Then this is me and this is me helping. Just like be mindful because you are in a place that's giving you the opportunity to, but still be mindful about how you go about it. It always bothers me when I'm like Instagram and, people are like, I went to Africa and you do the animal, the child. And I'm like, the child, no, maybe not.
Indeed. Lots of good food for thought here from people who've been involved with volunteering over the course of many years. My next guest is Jonty Crane, who's currently involved in long-term volunteer projects, staying up to a year or so in places, which is kind of volunteer travel at its extreme, I guess, but also really fascinating experience. So Jonty and his wife spent an extended time in Timor-Leste, and when I spoke with Jonty recently, they were on a long volunteer stint in Fiji, and we chatted about some of the volunteer programs he's been involved with or knows about.
So the best piece of advice I ever read about volunteering was, would you volunteer to do that activity in your own country? If not, why do you think you can do it in another country? Why do you think just because you speak English that you can teach English in another country? That's something which I see people volunteer, particularly kind of gap years or OEs kind of early on, which is, I'm sure, an amazing experience, but I think it's probably more for the volunteer than it is necessarily for the place you're volunteering. So after kind of a professional career for 20 odd years, I thought, well, there must be more to life than 9 to 5. And so I came across this organization called Volunteer Service Abroad, which is a New Zealand-based NGO. Now, there is an equivalent in Australia called AVI. And then there's also in America, there's the Peace Corps. And then the Japanese have got an equivalent and the Koreans have got KOICA. So my wife and I, we volunteered in Timor-Leste for a year, which I think I may have vaguely been aware of, but I definitely had no mental image of what to expect until we arrived in Dili, the capital. And the thing about VSA and AVI and those other programs is they tend to be quite long. Generally, the assignments are around a year, and it feels, just from my experience, having done it in Timor-Leste and also doing it now in Fiji, that you need at least probably 3 to 6 months to be able to do anything effectively, to have built up the relationships and the connections and understanding the culture, because they're quite different. They're quite different cultures as countries, but also quite different work cultures. And so adjusting to that can be quite tricky. And the roles they do, it's not just, I'm a willing pair of hands. You actually have to go through effectively a recruitment process, and there's a job or an assignment advertised. We want people with these skills and experience to do this thing, and they're quite specific. So VSA at the moment are advertising for people with beekeeping skills. Quite interesting just to look at what kind of things they're after. They're quite niche sometimes. So VSA, they operate across 10 countries across the Pacific, and our AVI do the Pacific, and they also do a bit of Southeast Asia and Africa. And so those are very well respected. They've been running for decades. They've got good policies in place around like child safety and making sure that they vet the partner organizations well. So I think if you're going to volunteer, you want to do it through a reputable organization. You want to have confidence that you've got the support network there in case things don't work out entirely as planned. What I've learned from my 2 experiences volunteering is you can read about something and you can read about a place and you can watch YouTube videos, but it's definitely not until you arrive, everything's completely different. And often there's quite a lag. So expect to take at least 6 months to get through the recruitment process. So this isn't a spur of the moment, I'm going to go volunteering next week. This is, okay, I'm doing my life planning and I'm interested in doing this thing. Now, a good way of doing it potentially, if your employer would allow you to take like a sabbatical or secondment for 12 or 18 months, that's a great way because you know you've got a role to return to. And what I quite like also about volunteering is you're living a local life. So the organizations will generally fund most of your costs, so accommodation and travel and living costs and food. People often say, well, how do you afford to do this? And my view is you won't be making any money, but you shouldn't be losing any money. So as long as you can, and particularly if you're renting out your house back home, you do still have some income coming in, and you just accept that for a year, okay, you're not going to be paying off the mortgage quite as quickly or adding to your savings, but the experiences you'll have are far more valuable than another year in the office. So that's how I valued it. Money is not necessarily the most important thing in life, and that richness of experience is something you can't replicate.
Absolutely.
And often the places they will send you to, so like, for example, VSA, they have volunteers in Kiribati, they have them in Bougainville, we were in Timor-Leste. Yeah, they're quite unusual places that you wouldn't visit as a tourist generally, or not for very long. And so it's just quite a unique experience to spend that time in those places.
Ah, it sounds amazing. What kind of roles do you and your wife do in these volunteer placements?
So my wife has a lot of experience in climate change and international environmental policies. So she volunteered with Oxfam in Timor-Leste, and in Fiji, she's been volunteering with the Ministry of Climate Change and the Environment. And then what all of these schemes will allow you to do is if one person is volunteering, the other one can go as an accompanying partner. And then that's what I did on both occasions. And then whilst I was in country, I kind of got a better feel for things and started doing stuff. So in Timor-Leste, I was volunteering with a local community NGO called Hamnasa, and that was a couple of days a week. And then when I was there, I was trying to find information out about things to do, like as you do when you kind of get somewhere. And I was like, there is nothing. Like if you start Googling Timor-Leste on Google, it's like one of these very rare black holes of information where there is nothing about Timor-Leste. And for example, I really like hiking, and I found this page which was like hiking in Timor-Leste. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a gold mine. And I looked at the date, and it was last updated in 2005. Ooh. And I was like, okay, so has nobody been hiking in Timor-Leste for the last 20 years and written about it? Seemingly not. So I kind of did it as a bit of a hobby. I started thinking, well, I'll start writing down what I'm doing when I go to places. And I made a website called exploringtimor.com. And then I thought, well, maybe I can do some promotion for Timor-Leste. So I went and visited the Ministry of Tourism, and I started volunteering with them for a few days a week. I created a TikTok account which had about 2 million views. It was funny. I was world famous in Timor-Leste. So I remember I was out hiking, and I wanted to take a shortcut through somebody's kind of property. And I was sort of saying, bon dia and bele, can I come through your property? And they were like, TikTok, you TikTok man. I'm like, okay, yeah. There's not many kind of white Malays on TikTok in Timor-Leste. And so I was like a known figure. Another time our vehicle got stuck in mud in the middle of quite a remote area, and these guys just appeared out of the bush to come and help us. And they're like, oh, you're on TikTok, Exploring Timor. I was like, yeah, okay, that's me. I'm the TikTok mate. So that was kind of a cool experience, which I wasn't expecting to have. And then I thought, well, maybe I could turn this into a guidebook. So then I wrote that into a guidebook, and I did a hiking guide and some photography books. And so it wasn't planned, but it turned out to be a really kind of fun and enjoyable thing to do. And then since I've been in Fiji, I've been doing a bit of work with the Pacific Travel Organization, which is an umbrella organization across 20 Pacific islands plus Timor-Leste, and they provide support and training for things that, like the Marshall Islands or FSM, they haven't got the capacity and to do a lot of things they need. So if you have a centralized organization, they can help out.
Great stuff. Jonty mentioned some of the national programs that coordinate long-term volunteers. So I'm going to add a list to the show notes, which includes those and some other recommendations for Canada, Germany, and the UK. Now, my final guest today is Bianca Rappaport, a long-term digital nomad who always likes to find opportunities to give back wherever she's travelling or living. And we chat about multiple ways that we could give our time and expertise to help others.
When it comes to volunteering, of course, I want to see what locals are actually asking for in terms of the support. I don't want to always be imposing what I think that locals need. I don't want to have this like white savior type of complex going on. I want to make sure that I'm able to support with the resources, the time and financial resources that I have as much as I possibly can. So I will look for that. There's a wonderful nonprofit called Give Back Guide, and they actually source regenerative volunteer opportunities all around the world. So that is a great resource if you are looking into more sustainable and regenerative travel volunteer opportunities. And my personal experience with volunteering has completely it's kind of all over the place, to be entirely honest. One thing that I've noticed over the years is that volunteering has always been a very fundamental part of my life. It's something that my parents instilled in me from a very young age. And I realized that a lot of the things that I did back home before I started traveling full time are just as applicable when I'm traveling around the world. So what I mean is I have donated my hair a couple of times to children with cancer. There's no reason why you're not able to do that while you're traveling around the world. I've given blood in many countries around the world as well. And it's something that you could do back home. And yes, it will require a little bit of extra research when you're going to different places, and every country will have its own systems. But those are things that I would have done otherwise. So there's no reason to stop doing it now. Another thing that I think about is when it comes to like activism, of course, like digital advocacy, like if you have causes that you care about, like if you're doing it when you're home, there's no reason why you can't continue doing that, both to support like local causes or issues that you really care about and international ones. And that could be through digital advocacy, making sure that you're taking the time to call your representatives to voice your concerns about issues back home. Just because you're traveling doesn't mean that you can't make those calls. For anyone that's from the US that's listening, there is one app called 5 Calls, and it actually will set you up with the numbers to call your representatives. And they even have scripts for you if you feel a little bit nervous about calling them. So there are definitely tools that can help facilitate this if you're just dipping your toes into that type of world. Also, if you're interested in protesting, of course, it's not safe for everybody, and it really depends. But if you feel comfortable in that type of aspect, I have gone to, I went to a women's rights protest in Croatia. I've gone to protest for Palestine in both Spain and in Italy. And I even got my 72-year-old mother-in-law involved for the very first time. So it's really interesting to experience that and to be part of those type of movements. And I've gone to protests for climate change wherever I possibly can.
Yeah.
I like to work at the intersection of like what you really care about. So if the climate is really important to me, I'll try to search for organizations that are related to that wherever I go. So I've found opportunities to do guerrilla gardening, to plant trees and do different things along those lines. Tons of beach cleanups. Actually, when I was in Santorini, I was really disturbed by how much trash there is in the low season. I don't know how it is now, so I can't speak on that. But when I was there, I just realized that it isn't taken care of the way it is in the summertime. And I was really disturbed by it, to be honest. And I just decided, you know what? Nothing is going on. Let me just organize some beach cleanup. So sometimes when you can't find necessarily like the opportunities to volunteer, you can also take the initiative to create them for yourself. So I just said, okay, I posted on Facebook and Instagram, whoever wants to come to this beach at this time every Saturday, I will be there. And at some point we had about 30 people coming out. We had people diving in the ocean to get trash out of the sea. And it was just an incredible thing. And after I left, I think they even kept it going for quite some time too. So it just goes to show that there are opportunities also to create your own initiatives if you have the guts for it.
I really appreciate Bianca's point that we should really remember the causes we care about most and continue to donate our effort or time to them, whether we're at home or not. For example, digital advocacy doesn't give you those feel-good Insta photos, but arguably maybe does a lot more good. And yeah, I think it's something that we can incorporate across our lives, traveling or not traveling. Not just digital advocacy, but, looking into what we can do wherever we are and whatever we're up to. Anyway, hopefully I've given you lots of thinking points if you are perhaps one day going to do some volunteering on your trips. Thank you so much for listening to episode 390 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Big thanks to my guests for their knowledge and their time. I started off chatting with Kim Crown and Edward Liamo from Pristine Trails, pristinetrails.com for information on their trips to Tanzania. I then chatted with Jonty Crane, more about Jonty at jontytravels.com, and he mentioned his work talking about tourism and looking around Timor-Leste, and he's got a website called Exploring Timor at exploringtimor.com. My last guest was Bianca Rappaport of the Wanderwell Club, and you can find out more about her Wanderwell work on Instagram. Just look up Wanderwell Club on Insta. Bianca also mentioned the Give Back Guide, which looks great. It's at giveback.guide. Don't forget, come along to the Facebook or LinkedIn groups for Thoughtful Travellers, or sign up for the Thoughtful Travellers newsletter at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. All of this information and more will be in the show notes. And for this episode, you can find them at notaballerina.com/390. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.